إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمد ابن عبد الله ابن عبد المطلب الهاشمي القرشي نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. إن أصدق الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة وأهلها في النار. أعاذنا الله إيانا وإياكم من النار. أما بعد. We praise Allah, we thank Him, we seek His assistance, we seek guidance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to misguide, there is no guidance for that person. And He whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, there is no misguidance. There is no misguidance for the person except for what He wills for them. We bear witness, I bear witness and testify, there is no deity that is entitled to be worshipped except Allah alone without any partners. And we bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn al-Hashimi al-Qurashi is the final messenger and servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My beloved brothers, ikhwatul kiram, usikum bi taqwallah. I give you the advice of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that he gave his companions, and that is to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we go to the Quran, we go through today's times, we go to the Sunnah, and we go through today's times, there's issues that come and go, issues that are of occurrences that appear in our time. And that's why we say, لا تسمح الأحداث الجارية أو النوازل أن تغير مبادئك أو أصولك الإسلامية. We say to the people, لا تسمح, do not allow الجاريات, the current occurrences, أو النوازل, the issues that have come, to change, and تغير أصولك, to change your mabadi and your usul, to change your principles. The Muslim should not allow the current occurrences, the current events, to change the Islamic principles. Issues that come every day, news that reach us every day that is new to us. As a Muslim brother, you should not allow it to change your principles of being a Muslim. Because Islam has given us usul fi kulli makanin wa zamanin. Islam has given us principles for every time and every place. Al-Islamu deenu li kulli zamanin wa makanin. Islam is a religion. Mada is a religion of every place and every time. It does not change based on the place you're in. You apply the same rules wherever you are as a Muslim. You apply the same rules wherever you are as a Muslim, in whatever time you're living in. Now, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, He said, قال الله تعالى اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Allah said, this day I have perfected you and your religion. I have perfected your religion and I've completed my favor upon you and have approved for Islam as the religion, Islam as the way we live, Islam as what we submit towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with tawheed, and we do things that are pleasing towards Him. فَنَجِدُ أُنَاسٍ, we find a people, يُغَيِّرُونَ الْمَوَادِ, they change their principles, وَالْعُصُولِ, the principles, بِسَبَبَ الْمُجْتَمَعِ, based on the community they live in, or ittijahat, or the trends that they follow, وَيُتَبِّكُونَ الْأَدِلَّةِ, and they implement evidences مِنْ أَهْوَائِهِمْ, from their own desires. And this is what we free ourselves from as Muslims. Ya ikhwa, we find people changing principles because of society, because of trends, and they apply evidences to support that particular action that they're doing from their desires. Allah told us in the Quran, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Don't you see the people who have taken his own or their own desires as a deity, as a god? Now, these are the people we are talking about. A person, he leaves the book of Allah. A person, he leaves the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A person, he leaves the methodology of the companions, and he does affairs that befits his desire. And this is what we free ourselves from as Muslims. We free from ourselves from people like that. Because why? They do things that befits their hawa, their desires. Islam is ma qala Allah, what Allah has said. Islam is ma qala Rasul, what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ala fahm as-sahaba, upon the understanding of the companions, ridwanullah alayhim. So we free ourselves from such behaviors, because Islam is for likulli makanin wa zamanin. Islam is for every makan, every place and every time. Wherever you're living in, whatever community you live in, you implement al-Islam, you implement its principles. We do not make ittijah based on trends. We do not change ourselves based on trends. Now, and if we do that, we will be from the people, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَى. Don't you see the people who have taken their desires as a deity? Will be from these people. We ask Allah to protect us from being from these people. Ameen. These are the people who change based on weather. These are the people who change based on the fact that they heard news of a personnel that has passed away, or they've heard news of political parties, or this type of affairs. They change their behaviors. They apply the wrong principles of Islam there. They try to use logic or affairs that are not from the book of Allah or the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam upon the understanding of the companions, ridwanullah alayhim. So my beloved brothers, upon us is to be firm. Alaykum bil Islam. Upon us is to live in a manner which is al-Islam. Alaykum bis sunnah. Upon you is to live in a manner of the sunnah. Alaykum bi fahm as-sahaba. Upon you is to live upon the understanding of the companions, ridwanullah alayhim. And that is why we've entered Islam fully. Allah told us in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu udkhulu fi silmi kaffah wa la tattabi'u khutuwati shaytan. Now he said, oh you who have believed, enter into Islam completely and perfectly, and do not follow the footsteps of shaitan. And that complete Islam is ma qala Allah, ma qala Rasul, ala fahm as-sahaba. The complete Islam is what Allah has said, and what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, and what the companion, upon the understanding of the companions. So that's why it leaves us to the point of loving and hating for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-wala'u wal-bara'ah. You find that you don't love an issue because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You like an issue because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You love your brother for the sake of Allah. You hate him if he does something that is displeasing towards Allah. فَهَذَا هُوَ الْوَلَاءُ وَالْبَرَاءُ. And this is what loving and hating for the sake of Allah is. Because Imam Ahmad mentioned in his Musnad, he said, عن براء ابن عازب, he said, عن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال إن أوثق أولى الإيمان أن تحب في الله وتبغض لله. He said that indeed from the pinnacle and the best ways of one's iman and one's faith and manners is that he loves and hates for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you find certain things that don't make sense to us, they don't make sense to the people, but applying the Sharia is what we've been commanded. Applying the Sharia, فَاسْتَنْكِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ, and remain steadfast as how you have been commanded. You are commanded to worship Allah in times of difficulty, you worship Allah in times of difficulty. You are commanded to worship Allah in times of diversity, happiness. You may call it, whatever you may call it. You worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You apply the correct principles. And that is what is meant here. Because we find a people, by a small trend or misunderstanding with tawasul, the tawasul internet, the social medias, you find a person changes based on what he sees on news. He leaves off the principles of the companions. He leaves off the principles of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he leaves off the principle of the legislator who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Based on something he saw, he throws away his religion. He sells his religion. Based on something she saw, she stops covering the hijab, the sister. Based on something he saw, he stops praying the salah correctly. Because why? This is a person who is changing with the weather. And we are Muslims, and upon us alayna al-Islam. Upon us is Islam. Wa alayna as-Sunnah. And upon us is the Sunnah. Wa alayna fahm as-Sahaba. And upon us is the way of the companions ridwanullahi alayhim. And that is why from loving Allah and loving what Allah loves is from the aqeedah of the believers. Loving Allah and loving what Allah loves is from the belief of the believers. And loving Allah and hating what Allah hates is from the belief of the believers. Al-wala'u wal-bara'. There are things that will not make sense into our minds, but as long as Allah قد قالها في كتابي, as long as the messengers قد وافقها كالسنة, خلاص, we come with that. That's what we come with it. And that's why we say on the day of Qiyamah there will be a people that are mutahabbina lillah. They love each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah yaqul yawm al-qiyamah. Allah will say on the day of Qiyamah, Ayna al-mutahabbina lillah. Where the mutahabbuna, where the people who love one another, bijalali, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-yawma udhilluhum fi dhil, yawma la dhil illa dhillu. Yeah, he says, today I will cover them in my shade, on the day where there's no shade except the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These people, they loved each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These people applied the correct principles. They ta'awun ala al-birri wa taqwa. They aided each other with that which is pleasing towards Allah, and that which is al-taqwa, which is that will bring closer towards Allah. Truthfulness, as-sidq. Now, that's what they had. وَلَا تَعَاوَنَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. They didn't come together upon what is falsehood and what was transgression. So, الْحُبُّ لِلَّهِ أَن تُحِبُّ مِنْ أَجْلِ اللَّهِ. The hubb, loving of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to love someone for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتُبْغِضْ فِي اللَّهِ فَإِذَا عَلِمْتَ أَنَّ شَخْصَ مَا عَلَى الْكُفْرِ وَالْمَعَاسِ تُبْغِضُهُ فِي اللَّهِ. If you find a person is upon this for the way of Allah, the way of the companions, the way of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you love him for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite where he comes from. And you find a person who is doing something that's displeasing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you dislike him for that purpose. You dislike him for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْمَحَبَّةِ فِي اللَّهِ لَيْسَتْ مَحَبَّةً مِنْ أَجْلِ التَّبَادُلِ. And loving for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake is not a love that is based on a trade. Now, it's not something that has a manfa'at, there's a benefit. Rather, it is for the sake of Allah. لكن هي محبة لله. Now, and this is for loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحبنا الله ويرضاه وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نرجع إلى كلامنا اليوم ألا وهو لا نسمح الأحداث الجارية أو النوازل أن نغير مبادئتنا أو الأصولتنا ألا وهو الإسلام. We return back to our discussion is that we do not allow the events or the occurrences of today's time to change our principles and our usul. Now, for the Muslim, upon the Muslim, alaykum bil Islam, wa alayna bil Islam. Upon us is Islam, upon you all is Islam, wa alayna as Sunnah, and upon us is the Sunnah, wa alayna afahm as Sahaba, and upon us is the understanding of the companions. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْءٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Now, he said these people are the men who did not divert based on a trade. They did not divert from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, they remain firm in whatever community they're in. They established Islam. Iqam as-salah. They established the prayer. Whatever community she's in, she covered correctly. And that is the Muslim. The Muslim is not changed by weather. The Muslim is not changed by some news or something has fallen down. The Muslim remains firm. He remains upon tawakkul Allah. He remains upon tawheed. He remains upon the oneness of Allah. He remains upon trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, and also we know that the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Hadith al-Malik, he said, أنه بلغه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال تركت فيكم أمرين. I left for you two matters, the Messenger said. I left behind two matters. لن تضلوا ما إن تمسكتما. He said that you will not be led astray if you hold upon those two matters. Kitab Allah, the book of Allah, wa sunnat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the sunnah of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. And this is why the Quran has left for us ways. The sunnah has left for us ways that if we implement it as rijal, as nisa al-Muslimin, as men of the Muslims, as women of the Muslims, we will not be astray. We will remain firm upon what Allah has commanded. As He said, فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ, and remain steadfast as how you have been commanded. And that's why we say from the affairs that cause a person to be deviated, or a person to be does not remain steadfast in times of difficulty, is Adam. He has Adam hujud al-ilm. He has lack of knowledge. These are from the affairs that bring about a person changing his religion or changing the principles of Islam. And from the asbab, من الأسباب الضياء المبادئ الإسلام Adam التعلم التوحيد. It is lack of teaching and learning the Tawheed, وتنفيذه, and explaining it, and teach and sharing it. فَعَلَمْ, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran, فَعَلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Implement that Tawheed. Know who is your Creator. Live by your Creator. Live by that Tawheed. And insha'Allah ta'ala we'll find ourselves in the people who do not change based on usul. Will not change based on anything that comes to us. Our principles will remain steadfast. And also from the affairs, من أسباب الذي ذياء المبادئ, from the things that we cause us to lose our principles as Muslims, is Adam, at-tawheed wa tawakkul ala Allah. Is us having lack of at-tawheed and trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah told us in the Quran, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever puts their trust in Allah, Allah is sufficient for them. Another reason from what causes a person to lose his principles of Muslim, from causes a person from implementing Islam, is Adam al-ittiba' al-Islam and tariq al-sahaba. Is a person lack in following Islam upon the way of the companions ridwanullahi alayhim. Because Allah told us in the Quran, وَمَن يُشَاكِكِ الرَّسُولِ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ سَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا. People, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ وَمَن يُشَاكِكِ الرَّسُولِ, whoever goes against the path of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, this person, he follows the path other than the path of the companions. وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى, we leave him upon their path. Now we prepare him, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ سَاءَتْ مَصِيرًا, and Jahannam is made prepared for the person, and he will live in the Jahannam. We ask Allah to protect us from that. Ameen. Another thing that brings about a person or causes a sister or brother to lose upon the principles of being a Muslim, now is again Adamu ta'allamul Islam, is lack of learning one's religion, belittling learning of religion. And this is from the things that will cause a person not to implement the principles in times of difficulty. If a person does not have tawheed, a person does not have at-tawakkul, a person does not follow the way of the Islam in the way of the companions, that person akid annahu, that person will lose his principles when it comes to difficulty. And that's why the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us in the hadith of Irbad ibn Sariyah, he said, Inna minkum man ya'ish ba'di fasayara ikhtilafan kathira. He said, you people will live after me, you're going to come across a lot of differences. Alaykum bisunnati wa sunnati al-khulafa ar-rashidin. Upon you is my way and the way of the rightly guided caliphs, the rightly guided leaders of al-Islam, and those are the companions. And that's why Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said, what did he say? He said, if we follow the path of the people who have passed away, and those ulaika ashab Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Islam is a clear religion. It's a religion that is implemented by every time, and it's a religion that's implemented by every place. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we be from the people who remain steadfast. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ. Be steadfast is how you've been commanded. Now, that's why the Messenger sallallahu, and from the ways that we attain this is by remaining steadfast upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered, and what the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has taught, and what the companions have understood by Allah, by Allah and His Messenger in the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So upon the believing brothers, upon the believing sisters, is that you do not change your principles based on something you've seen on the internet. You do not change your principles based on the place you are staying. You do not change your principles based on the business that you are doing. Implement al-halal, implement al-haram every time the time comes to you. Do not change based on that. We are Muslims. Allah speaks of us with proud. He speaks of us with pride. He speaks of us, Ibadur Rahman, alladhina yamshuna al-ardi hawna. We are attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is speaking of us. He says that these are the Ibadur Rahman. These are the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alladhina yamshuna al-ardi hawna. They go on the path of Allah hayyina. They go with humility. They go in practice of what Allah has legislated, what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said by way of the Sunnah, and what we understand by way of the companions of Allah. So let the person learn these affairs. Because the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us in the hadith of Bukhari, he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not bring a problem to us unless He brought a solution. If you find yourself in a situation of a community where you feel you cannot practice Islam, there is a way you can practice Islam. فَإِنَّ الشِّفَاءُ الْعِيُّ السُّؤَالُ أو كما قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام. He said, because why? He said that the cure or the solution for a problem is to ask and seek advice from the right people. Allah told us in the Quran, اسألوا أهل الذكر. Ask the people of knowledge. Seek advice from the people of knowledge. Seek guidance from these brothers. Seek guidance from your teachers. Seek guidance from the leader of Islam. Because this is the same thing that will keep you steadfast in times of difficulty, ya ikhwan. So let the Muslim be firm. Let the Muslim follow what Allah has legislated in Sharia. Let the Muslim follow what the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam states. And let the Muslim follow the understanding of the companions ridwanullah alayhim. And upon us is that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify our hearts. Ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid the Muslimin fi kulli makan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring victory to the Muslims fi kulli makan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be with the Muslim وَلَا يَكُمْ مَعَ الظَّالِمِينَ. We ask Allah that He be with the Muslim, He does not be with the oppressors. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify the hearts of the people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He causes us to die upon the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of the people who implement Islam according to the understanding of the companions ridwanullah alayhim. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He unites all the Muslimin in Jannah. Ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for the shortfalls we come with. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify the Muslim people around the world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of the people that are dear to Him and that are best to Him. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.